everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Nomad World weekly series. I'm Becky, and I'll be your host. And today we're going to be talking about becoming a digital nomad only for the winter with my guest, Andrea Nepori. Andrea, welcome to the show.
Hi, Becky. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's so nice to have you. And I think we're going to talk about something today that people often think about doing, but maybe they
Mhm.
don't always make the effort. And maybe by listening to us today, they're going to get inspired to go somewhere like What's Behind Me or What's Behind You for the winter instead of some cold, yeah, kind of miserable place that they often find themselves. So excited to
Light
share this.
deprived. Yeah.
Yeah, light deprived also. All right. So I'm first really curious, what is your background with being a digital nomad? How did you get started on your journey?
So I think that first of all, I want to understand whether I'm a digital nomad or a winter skipper. That's a word I use. As you mentioned, I only become a digital nomad for 2 to 3 months, usually every year, which is usually the winter. And it started by chance. So again, I guess for a lot of people in this space, with some friends convincing me that there was no reason to stay in Berlin for the winter. It was 2017, and why don't you just come with us and work remotely from Asia? And I started. There was maybe a month that time, and I realized, oh, this is actually pretty cool, and it can be done, and it didn't affect my productivity. It didn't affect me talking to people in Europe because of the time difference is not so dramatic as in other places of the world. That would be Australia, for example. And so it became something that I decided, I think I need to do this again. And then from the second year on, it's like, I definitely need to do this again every year. And I started also building or thinking about my work life in a way that would make this possible. Of course, pandemic excluded, but apart from black swan events like the pandemic, it definitely worked for me to think in those terms so that every year this could be repeatable and it wouldn't affect my bottom line. Let's put it that way. And that's how I started.
Amazing. So I do want to paint a picture for people. How long had you been remote or able to work remotely before you finally in
Mhm.
2017 went away for the winter?
I have to say, I say this jokingly, of course, I am a remote working hipster. I definitely did it before it was cool. I started working as a remote worker 17 years ago. So 2007, I was still studying and I started working for a company doing online publications, which then led to my main job, that is one of writing and journalism. And at that time, the company was in Rome. I'm from Italy, of course. The company was in Rome. I was living still in Tuscany, and I didn't want to move to Rome. I mean, I loved Rome, but the city is chaotic. I didn't want to spend basically three-fourths of my income in rent. At the time, was really out of control for me as a 20 something, and they were totally fine. They were so like, we're an online business. We don't need you here. Just come maybe once a month. And so in 2007, we had this business. They had this business. I was then part of it, where everyone was actually remote first. So I was lucky. I was lucky to find a company and someone that really believed in this way before it was something that appealed to a larger crowd. That's how I started originally. It's always been like that. It's been conducive to me moving to Berlin eventually because I wasn't. You might hear some birds around me, which I hope that's it's not disturbing, but adding to the setup. So I moved to Berlin eventually with the knowledge that I could keep this job for at least another year because this was not really tied to being somewhere. And eventually, then even in Berlin, I realized, wait a minute, I'm not tied to be here when it's the most miserable time of the year. So I can also go away in winter, and that's, let's say, how it escalated over 17 years. But I've always been remote.
And don't worry about the sound of the birds. It's adding to the sounds of winter paradise on a
Yeah,
tropical island. I
yeah,
know right now you're in Koh Lanta, Thailand.
yeah.
So that's where we actually have met. And it's been interesting to hear your story because I'm curious, like if you had been remote for that long,
Mhm.
why did it take you so long to finally go away for the winter and leave Europe?
That's a very good question. Uh, when we exchanged a few notes about this conversation, I started thinking about it a little bit more intensely than I usually do, and I realized that I don't have a real answer for that. I think that the only answer is, okay, so the practical one is, I was in Italy for part of this time, and the winter is not as bad as it would be in Northern Europe. And I mentioned in the beginning the light. For me, the light is the thing. Everyone thinks the cold, but I would say I know a lot of people that wouldn't appreciate the level of heat and humidity that we have here in Thailand, for example. So for some people, being in a colder climate in winter is fine. It's just the light. As a Mediterranean, I guess I cannot live without extended periods of light during the day. I get seasonal depression pretty heavily, and I just realized that I had to balance the guilt of doing something that society might, yeah, frown upon you if you just escape from your duties here in the doom and gloom of the German winter. And on the other hand, yeah, but I need to care about myself, and I am so miserable if I stay here. And there's nothing keeping me from that. I would say, so the answer, long-winded, sorry, I was basically thinking out loud. I wasn't as miserable as I was in a German winter before. And so it took me 2 winters in Germany to realize that something needed to be done. And I was in the lucky position to be able to do it. So yeah, that's the answer. I think I needed the German winter to realize how much I need to go away for the winter.
I think that really makes sense. I used to live in Tokyo, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize that Tokyo actually has a wonderful winter full of sunlight. And so even though it could be cold, I never experienced a kind of depression from it. But I spent
Yeah.
last year, I did spend 5 weeks in Berlin, and I know exactly that kind of lack of light that you're talking about. I'm sure people who've lived in the UK and many other places in the
Yeah.
Northern European area would also understand that it's very different. And I'm glad that you kind of felt what you needed and took action. And I think people listening or watching to this, you know,
You can do
it's
it.
something
You
to
can
think
do it,
about.
people.
You can do it. Yes, you can do it. And if you're feeling this depression, you should do it if it's possible. Now, I do also want to ask, why are you based somewhere versus
Mm.
being a full-time digital nomad?
Well, I've been in this space long enough. I actually interviewed nomads before. Just before the pandemic, I wrote an actual reportage from here when I am right now about this phenomenon. And I talked to a lot of people, and I realized that even the long-term nomads have some know about some of the drawbacks of this lifestyle, which is the lack of a stable base, uh, the difficulty that might come in nurturing some type of relationships. And the answer to that is that at a time, I am at a time in my life where I also value the stable nature of a place like your home base. So I do need a home base. As much as I need to be away for the winter, as much as I need to know that I need a break from it, I know that for the way I am, I need to have a network of relationships that I can call somewhat akin to family, that I also need to have duties towards. It's not just about taking from it, but just the idea of having to be needed because of someone that I consider families around me is there, still contributes to my happiness. And therefore, it can be balanced, it can be managed. Um, this has nothing to do with the nature of the lifestyle of the nomad, which is perfectly sustainable, I believe, based on where you are in a time in your life and what you need from life in that specific moment. And that could be traveling without a base, without feeling like you have to be tied down. But the idea of being anchored somewhere for me is important. I think it's also my Italian heritage. Family has a big say in that. I used to think it was because of guilt at some point as well. Oh, the guilt would keep me from doing that. And then I had to realize, no, wait a minute. I do actually like the idea of having to be needed in a specific place with my presence. I'm happy that I can do that in the better summer months in a place where I then eventually over 10 years, I've been living in Berlin for 10 years. I built minimum family-like relationships in my let's say cohort of close friends, and that's what I like to go back to. It has a nice feeling, this idea of going back to. So I thought many times, could I do these things of just giving everything up and just traveling? And I think the answer has always been no. I don't know in the future. Maybe in the future there will be something like that for me. Another very practical reason, I can do it. Like the practical reason I can do it. I'm lucky enough in Berlin to have a situation with an old rent contract. And so if anyone's familiar with Berlin, they're also familiar with how crazy the situation is with rent. And rents in any big European cities, but in Berlin in the last few years, as prices have skyrocketed, I'm able to afford to live for a while. I wouldn't feel comfortable being able to just give up what I have there, my contract, my apartment, because I know that at some point I might want to go back there, and it could be extremely hard to find the base that I built for myself with the same level of affordability, with the same level of how that fits into my life. So that also plays a very practical role, to be honest.
I'm sure you're not alone in that. I've heard people from San Francisco, people from London. Yeah, you get into these situations and you feel that you can't leave it. And I think I'm sure that that plays into people not wanting to leave for the winter if they're holding on to their apartments and let's say they can't sublet or have someone come in and pay, get
Mm.
some money while they're away, that they think, oh, this isn't financially,
Yes.
logical. I don't know. Have you felt that? Did any of that ever play in when you were thinking of going away for several
Uh,
months?
Look, I am in a very lucky position where if I don't find someone to sublet my apartment, I can still afford a couple of months of rent that goes basically paid for nothing. Let's put it that way. I've been lucky so far that in Berlin, the request for this is so high, and my landlord is also pretty lax about this rules. And currently, for example, my apartment while I'm here is not really sublet. There's a friend of mine that gives me a very uh, small sum to use it as a studio because they're also working remotely, and it helps them considering that they have a kid, so they can't really feel like they could do this winter. Uh, but this person is then using the place as their own studio. And for me, that's a perfect setup. I have someone watering the plants and using my space, meaning in a meaningful way. But this is something people need to really think about and find solutions around because it is a big stopper, I would say. Like if you have a big rent from these big cities, and I think actually though, then it becomes that's the tipping point I was talking about before. Maybe if I was in such a situation, I was so fed up with that, I would eventually end up in, you know what? I feel better being around these places. So there is an option for me to stop spinning around in the hamster wheel of paying a high rent every month and paycheck to paycheck. I give it up. I start traveling. I end up having even a better financial situation that I would have if I had to pay that rent. I could see myself doing that kind of jump. And I think that I don't have that incentive because I'm lucky enough to be in a situation where I don't have to. Which is going back to maybe answering also why I'm not no, but 100%, including also what I said about having a base and a stable network where I'm based. But it's also about this, the practicality of not having the incentive of leaving a overwhelming situation in a big city, which is what I heard from a lot of people that I've been talking to. Like, doesn't make sense. I just feel better here, and it even makes more financial for some of them to adopt this lifestyle.
Yeah, I know there's so many reasons that people are full-time digital nomads versus just part-time. Some people are trying to have what they call the best of both worlds of the base
Mm-hmm.
and going around. I love that you have this ability to choose, and I hope that a lot of people watching are hoping to get to the same point. Also, you mentioned, your friend had children. That's another thing. I know a whole
Yeah.
other layer of complication. I have seen some families that are traveling. I don't know if you have. Have you met a lot of digital nomads when you've traveled in the winter that have kids?
I think I've met more people that decided that maybe they were between jobs or they had, I don't know, I think I met a startupper once who had a big exit and so he could afford to just travel for 3, 4 months with the family. I think those are more niche specific situations that are definitely related to the financial availability of the family, because it might be that you have even to come here and maybe bring a nanny and things like that. So that's even a niche in the niche. I met here, currently here in Kolanta, not this year, but last year, someone who came with a family. They find a setup with a nice house that they could afford. And specifically, the father or husband, as you prefer in that case, was working basically a 9 to 5 here. The other person was mostly taking care of the kid, and then they would just do sort of a normal 9 to 5, very normative in a way, kind of life here. Um, that takes, I guess, a lot of planning. If you have that, there's a lot of additional commitments. What do you do with the kids' kindergarten? What do you do with this? There is that has needs to become more of a group effort. Here in Kolanta, there's a community of Swedish people that basically have come here every year, and then the community grow bigger. They have 2 Swedish schools. Uh, we go into a very different set of problems there, as in, are they colonizing the island? But in a way, that's the only possible way. So the kids can come here and they escape the even gloomier Swedish winter, but the kids don't skip school because they have the ability to do. I think the school is equal to the school they have in Sweden, so that's an option like that. I would say if you're really motivated to do this, even if you have a family and you have the incentive to think about this in a practical way, you might find solutions, but adding another person, another responsibility adds always an exponential layer of complications. Absolutely. So long-winded answer to say, yes, I've seen some of them. I don't know how to do it. I am really in awe of how they were able to organize that, because the complications that come in for me sometimes feel even more overwhelming. My toilet had a problem this year in Berlin, and it's like a major first world problem, but try organizing a plumbing service from 6 hours difference, Thailand, and then talking to a disgruntled plumber in German from Thailand. So how do you do that when that is about your kid's health? I can't start to imagine that. But yes, it can be done with a lot of planning, with a lot of effort, and a lot of determination.
Yeah, there's so much to think about. And speaking about the planning, so I know you can only speak from your side, but what kind of things do you do to prepare going away for the winter? And how long
Mm.
are you away this time from Berlin?
10 weeks in total, so 2.5 months, more or less, a bit less than that. I what I usually do is this. Of course, you plan the trip in advance. You don't have to plan the details. You have to think in terms of, first of all, what is the best period? Check in where you want to go. Are you able to take some vacation in the beginning? I think that's fundamental. Let's take at least 2 weeks vacation to settle in where you are. So going into the very practical advice here, don't think that if you've never done this, especially, you might just turn off your computer on Friday, jump on a plane, get to Thailand, and start working on Monday. It doesn't work like that. It's not just about the jet lag. Even if you were going from Berlin to Munich, it wouldn't work. When you change your environment, your brain needs time to adapt. You will feel foggy, you will feel unable to be productive, and you might start thinking, oh, I made the wrong decision. I thought I would come here and be productive because it's warm, it's nice, it's sunny, and it's not working. This is similar to what I call like never judge a place where you go to in the first 2 days, because the first 2 days are always, you will always have the worst experiences because you will always be comparing with whatever came before. This is similar to that. And so what I do, I plan myself even psychologically to know that in the beginning, I need to some time to adapt and stay where I am. Usually I travel a bit for those 2 weeks because then it's actual vacation. So I do some Highland this year. I was for the first part with my partner, and we did some Highland island hopping, and we ended up then here in Kolanta with 5 6 days to go before actual starting to have to start working. First, a piece of advice. Then, of course, the planning, the flights. It's totally doable not to have a return flight. Just be sure that the place you go to allows you to do that, because some places like Vietnam might need at least a dummy ticket for return. Um, That's another practical advice. So check visa situations, check if the kind of work you do can be done where you're going. If you do a digital job, basically every place is fine because you can just be around, but it's a bit of a gray zone. You cannot operate in the countries you go to. You have to remember that. Like if you're a yoga teacher and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to do yoga teaching, you will have to operate in a gray zone unless you get a working visa. It's also something that some people overlook often. Even if you're doing online yoga teaching, you shouldn't be doing that very publicly. That's at least in countries like Thailand, you could incur in some issues. Uh, all these things sort of need to be planned. And then I would say take care of whatever you need to do for wintering your apartment or subletting. That's the hardest part, to be honest. To be a, Sometimes you just might not want to give your apartment to a stranger, and totally understandable, but be prepared that that might need to be done. So there needs a bit of a mental level of preparation of letting go of some of the things that you might consider touch. And after that, just start and enjoy and let yourself be surprised, because the experience you envision will never be the experience you have. But the best way to have the experience you're going to have is to accept what's coming your way and try to work towards it, and trusting that, especially if you come to countries like this, you're not going to the third world. Like you're going to a developed country. You're going to where you get probably better internet and mobile coverage that I know I have in Germany. And so you will find everything you need. Unless you go in an adventure, but that's not digital nomadism. That's going into adventure, travel adventure, and that's something different. If you come, of course, check where you're going, check how's the internet, check how's the availability of what you need to be able to get your job done. If you do all these things together, I think you'll set and you can have a great, amazing nomad trip.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for covering all of that so thoroughly. There is a lot to consider. I think it can overwhelm people sometimes, and they will just stop, taking these chances or the opportunity, I should say, to go over
Yeah,
somewhere else for the winter. You have been coming, you mentioned you were also in Koh Lanta last
yeah,
year.
yeah,
Are you staying? I mean, you mentioned that you had been traveling with your partner and then you came to Koh Lanta. Do
yeah.
you go to the same place for winter now every year? I know you've just been doing it since
Mhm.
2017. Do you have any other places that you're considering in the future for your dream winter
Yeah.
destination?
Um, you might hear a little bit of background noise again, but that's I think it's okay. Um, I came to Cologne the first time in 2017 by chance because a friend suggested it. And after that, I realized that this was so doable that I had to repeat it every year, except for the pandemic. What happened back then is that I didn't know that I would find a place that would call me back every year. Um, I like it here because of how easy it is to come and feel it's like home away from home, so that it shortens that time that I need to feel adapted. I know where my best favorite restaurant is. I know who to talk to do this and that. I know how to rent the motorbike quickly. I know that there's a space that I can go to for work that I really love and makes me productive. So the idea of finding your own space and place is really important for doing this. And I know people that only jump on a plane, get to Bangkok, come here, stay for 3 months, and go back. Also, not my thing because I like to discover and see new places, which comes in with this idea that I place my 2 weeks vacation before arriving here. But this is the going back before going back for me. So I go somewhere, I explore, then, oh, there's Koh Lanta waiting for me. I can go, I can see my friends, because of course, over years, and it's people that come within your same nomad bubble that will be here as well with the same kind of mindset. And that has happened again this year, and I'm quite sure it will happen again next year. So yes, find your spot if you can by exploring. There's no other way. Or you can try and look up, or resources like the one you build here is great for understanding where this could be beforehand. I didn't have that in 2017, I have to say. I just had to come here by chance. Um, but there's a lot more resources now that you could see where are nice co-workings or communities that might group around the same idea. Another place where I go often to is Vietnam. I know you do too. And that's another place where I know that wherever I end up, I can find a bit of community. I love the locals. Uh, there's many places where I feel very accepted, and that also helps. Hoi An is a great place. I would say yes, if you can find a place where you can return to, don't feel like it's a shame that you always go to the same place. This is not about vacationing in the same hotel on a lake every year. This is more like finding your home away from home and being sure that that's a safe place for you to stay over the winter. So it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, it's funny before that you mentioned guilt because I've even faced some, guilt tripping. We say like when I've gone to the same places, more than once or even more than
The
twice.
FOMO,
People,
the FOMO of
yeah.
not doing exactly what everyone expects from our fancy lifestyle of travelers right now. And then you realize, oh, wait, you go to the same place? What do you mean you go to the same place? Well, I'm not on vacation. I'm just going to work from somewhere. That's the main thing to explain to people. How's your vacation going? Is always the first question when we start a call. I stop repeating, I'm not on a vacation. Call it vacation, call it whatever you want it. Of course, I have the beach over here, but this is I work 8 hours a day anyway when I'm here, so maybe a bit less, okay, but
Yeah, no, and I think that it's the perception. People think also that they give you sometimes guilt from your base where you are that, oh, well, it's very
mhm,
easy for you. You're in Thailand, and on the beautiful beach. You're not working as hard because you escaped this hard winter life that, I'm going through. And I think that, I wish that that would stop because I wish people could all find the place that they wanted to spend even a couple of weeks or a month and escape if they're feeling that where they are is
yeah,
hard and tough, that they could find a way
I agree.
to get away.
um Look, I have that with friends right now. There's been some issues with friends that are in Berlin, and I feel, of course, guilty and sad that I cannot be there to help them. But from another perspective, is also this is a lifestyle choice that I do without hurting anyone. And I'm lucky to have people that are mostly happy for me that I'm able to do this. And I'm always open and available to help them and come over and do that with me if they want to, do this with me if they want to, because I believe that there is a way for a lot of people to do this sustainably, of course, without um, thinking like we're just going come over here and this is our space. Another thing is that this is a home away from home, but when I come here, I'm always aware that I'm a guest. It's also a nice mindset to have, not to go around and be like feeling like you own the place. Helps something that I want to really point out when I always talk about nomadic lifestyles with people. Yes, and that is something that you also have to be prepared to have. That's a very good point, Becky. Like there will be someone calling from home that will have a hard time not letting that hint of resentment come through in the call that it's so easy for you. You're at 30 degrees, you're not having winter. And then you need to, base yourself again and say, I didn't force you to stay where you are. I didn't force you to stay. And unless you have life situations that keep you from doing that, you're free to do this choice yourself as well, especially now after the pandemic where a lot of employees can actually do this. Because the big difference for me was being a freelancer needed to be the prerequisite to do this. Not anymore. Not anymore. So it's never been this easy uh, to do this.
Yeah, I think that's a really big reason I wanted to have you on and talk about this is because we are in this new era where more people have more options, but maybe they're not taking them yet. And the winter really can, with no light, with very cold temperatures, make you
Mhm.
miserable and make you more unproductive and, even have to seek out more time to get some help. And I think if
Absolutely.
sometimes it's just changing your environment. So I hope this is inspiring people to start
Mhm.
considering it for the next winter or even those who are in winter now to will be in winter in our summer, what we think of summer, they could start preparing and thinking of some options.
Yeah.
I do want to point out or one other thing about Koh Lanta in particular that people may look for in other places. I know Koh Lanta, the co-working space there where you're at right now called Koh Hub, they are a 24/7 space. Can you describe it a little bit for the people who are like on European working hours, what they're doing at CoHub in Thailand?
That's a very good point because in Thailand, of course, you have a +6 or +7 from the UK, of course, or Portugal, and some other countries from Europe. And that can be tricky if you do have an employee job where you need to show up. A lot of people that I see here try to work normal day hours, and they maybe put the meetings and whatever it is that they have to interact with people in Europe in their afternoon. But there's a lot of people that do European hours. So they start at 2 in the afternoon and sort of have a lunch dinner break when people have lunch break in Europe, and then they can stay here until how long they want. The place is 24/7 as a security system where you go in whenever, so you're allowed to always come in. There's lockers to leave your stuff. It's a very safe place, and it gives you the ability to work anytime you want. In fact, I have some friends here that I'm sure that if I want to play a pool game, I can come here at 1 a.m. after being out, and they will be finished working, and it's a great time to come here and maybe have a game of pool in the games area. Many places in this part of the world know that their business model is based on people coming over to be able to work in connection with Europe, or sometime the US. You have a 12-hour difference with some parts of the US, like the East Coast. So there's a lot of people that do a completely reverse and work at night, which is actually pretty nice here, unless you're definitely not a complete night owl, because it's fresher and you can enjoy the day. So if you're also able and willing to shift your usual 9 to 5 mentality, this is a great way and place to find it. There's nothing that keeps you from shifting the mindset that you might have ingrained that you need to work from 9 to 5. There's nothing that better than this place to shift your mindset from I need to be here in winter because sorry, but the only problem is sometimes I have insects in front of me. So that's definitely a downside. So yeah, there's nothing keeping you from switching this mindset except from what you mentioned, your guilt or the habit.
Yeah.
Places like this, as I always say, remove the friction that we have in our lives. This is something that I think it really attracts me here. There's less and less friction. Everything is simpler. You have to accept that you don't have as many choices as where you are in Bali, but the choices can be overwhelming sometimes. And the ability to just do things in a simpler, frictionless way is a great enabler of a calmer, happier lifestyle that ends up making you more productive if you do it this way.
Yes, and what I'm about to say is not to say I'm taking advantage of anyone or a situation, but being in a hotel here in Koh Lanta, where I am as well, like any hotel, I'm getting my room cleaned by someone else every day. And so if I want to take a break from doing housework where I'm based, for a month or two, it's an option. And also here in Thailand, a lot of places in Asia, it is harder, but not impossible to find a kitchen or a full kitchen in your room. And so that makes me eat out at restaurants. And so I'm also taking a break from cooking, whether I like it or not. And if you want to take a break from those things in your everyday life, it's also a nice chance to go somewhere and try that.
Yeah. And that's sustainable. It's always like to say, of course, we need to tackle the entire problem of how we might be this something that is, there's plenty of articles if you want to look about this neo-colonialism idea of doing this kind of lifestyle, but it's not. It needs to be mindful, and we need to be mindful of our privilege, I always say. But there is a nice, especially in places like this, a nice symbiotic way of being here. Koh Lanta is also a nice place because you don't feel so expunged from the locals. We hang out with the locals. We have local friends. If you come here often, you know that they own bars or anything. They welcome you back when you come here. They know about your family, you know about their family. You visited them in their houses. It happened to me multiple times. So it doesn't feel like I'm here exploiting. That is a big part for me because that would feel really, there's other parts where this is easier to be done in poorer countries than Thailand. And in the end, a place like Koh Lanta is not so cheap compared to other areas in Asia. So you don't really feel like you're exploiting. That's a big part for me that I wanted to point out, because this can be done sustainably, also ethically. And what you mentioned, though, is that there is an economy that revolves around us being here, and that economy is sustainable also for the locals. And that's the economy that enables this frictionless lifestyle that you mentioned, which is definitely a nice break from the usual duties that you might have in your life. And it might do wonders for your mental health, to be honest.
Yeah. Yes, I do want to reiterate what you said. We are, balancing the local economy, doing it in a sustainable way. And you are paying for the right to be in a hotel or whatever along with those expectations. So
Yes.
yeah, and as you said, Koh Lanta is not necessarily a cheap place. That is,
No, yeah,
you need to know that going in, check the costs of everywhere you decide to
of
go. But
course.
hopefully we can all find a good balance for ourselves and have, a good break for mental health. It's also interesting that Koh Lanta, I should mention this, Co-Hub, which is the co-working space on Koh Lanta, they now take a 6-month break or 7-month break. They're
That's very important.
closed from the end of April to, I think it's sometime in November.
Yeah, they
So
started this year. They started first of November, I believe. Yes. So they close for the so-called low season here. And it's very
yeah,
important for them as well.
so they're
So
taking
we're
care of
more
their
happy.
mental health
Yeah.
also. Yeah. Well, Andrea, it has been so nice to chat with you about this topic. I hope people watching are thinking now maybe about planning their own winter away if they're remote already. And is there anything else you would like to share with us before we go?
I think we touched on many topics. I've been like, my Italian long-winded answers have definitely brought more information, a bit of rambling. I hope not too much to the table. So no, we touched on so many topics. The only last thing I say is look at your life, look if you're not feeling great or happy where you are, and find steps to see if this lifestyle could contribute to that. Maybe not, maybe not. I have friends that enjoy being closed in their apartment programming the entire month of February in Berlin. Good for them. It's not me. Everyone has a chance to do what makes them happy. This might be something that fits in your lifestyle. And it's as I said before, there's so many resources out there. It's never been as easy as now.
Very well said. So, Andrea, if people want to follow you, where can they go?
I don't have large social presence, but Instagram would be the place. It's easy to find me. It's my first name, last name. So Andrea Nepori. Mostly it's my photography stuff and journalism related things, or photojournalism. So at Andrea Nepori, uh, the name spelling would probably be in the description of this episode. So no need to spell it out, I guess.
Yes, we will put your name and hopefully we spell it right. Okay, so everybody, you can go and follow Andrea's photography and whatever you decide to share with us in the future. So thank you again, Andrea, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your winter away from the cold.
Thank you so much for having me, Becky.
Thank you very much.